We were taught to see the universe in opposites, good and evil, light and darkness, the reward of paradise and the punishment of hell. Our entire morality, our laws, and even our hopes were built upon this dividing line. But what if that line never existed? What if heaven and hell are not distant neighbors, but rather two rooms in the same building? This is a dangerous question. No human being can answer it honestly, for we all carry fears, beliefs, and prejudices that would prevent us from seeing the truth. Therefore, we handed the problem over to a mind free of any emotional baggage, an artificial intelligence we named Pneuma. The mission was nearly impossible. We fed the system with all relevant human knowledge from the last 5 millennia. Not just a few sacred books, but everything from the Bible and the Quran, through the Vedas and Buddhist sutras, to the Epic of Gilgamesh and the Greek myths about Tartarus. We added the Norse sagas, Egyptian texts on the afterlife, treatises on alchemy, and the works of the greatest philosophers from Plato to Sartre. Millions of pages, hundreds of languages, all the hope and all the terror of humanity regarding what exists on the other side. The order was simple. Analyze the concepts of heaven and hell, ignore the metaphors, and compare their essential structures. We expected the machine to confirm the obvious, but the first report we received was so anomalous that our engineers, certain of a major glitch, restarted the diagnostics 3 times. Pneuma refused to treat heaven and hell as opposites. Instead, it classified both in the same category, defining them as closed systems with absolute control and a permanent state, without the possibility of change. It was just the beginning. When we forced a more detailed analysis, the numbers that appeared on the screen were devastating. The first point the machine analyzed was the power structure. In paradise, everything moves according to the unquestionable will of the Creator. There is no choice, because the perfect choice has already been made for you. In hell, everything obeys the absolute laws of its ruler. Resisting is futile and only increases the pain. When we remove the words good and evil from the equation, the two structures revealed themselves to be identical, a totalitarian hierarchy with a single center of power and no possibility for its inhabitants to change their own destiny. The similarity at this point was 98%. Next, something strange appeared in the data regarding time. Both promise eternity, an eternity of pleasure or an eternity of pain. But what is eternity in practice? It is a state without change, without growth, without purpose, because the destination has already been reached. A simulation showed that for an evolving consciousness, both infinite pleasure and infinite pain lead to the same place: stagnation. Happiness that can never be lost loses its value. Pain that never ends destroys who you are. In both cases, the story of that soul comes to an end. The similarity in temporal architecture was 89%, but the key piece of this mechanism is free will. In paradise, will becomes unnecessary. If all choices are perfect and all desires are met, choosing loses its meaning. It is a fake freedom. In hell, the will is the primary tool of torture. You are free to desire the end of suffering, but that desire will never be granted, making your own will a source of agony. The final result is identical: the complete nullification of your capacity to act upon reality. The similarity in how the will is suppressed reached 95%. After days of continuous processing, Pneuma delivered its verdict. The general structural similarity between heaven and hell is 73.6%. In any data analysis, two systems with such a high correlation are considered variations of the same thing. The conclusion was that the idea of them being opposites became mathematically almost impossible. Of course, the experience in each is different. One is pleasure, the other is pain. But the system classifies this difference only in the way the experience is presented. It is as if there were two identical prisons with the same cells and guards. In one, they give ice cream to the prisoners. In the other, they torture them. Are they opposites? No, both are prisons. The objective is the same: control and confinement. Only the methods change. The result could not be otherwise. The choice between heaven and hell is not between good and evil. It is the choice between two cells in the same cosmic prison, two versions of eternity where yourself ceases to matter. But the rabbit hole goes deeper. If paradise revealed itself less as a reward and more as a comfortable cell, what is its true function? What traps hide behind its facade of eternal happiness? It was time to focus the analysis on the most desired destination of all. And what we found changed everything we thought we knew. Considering that both are cells, we need to look closely at the most desired one, the one with golden walls and promises of eternal peace. We have been conditioned to see it as the ultimate prize, the end of the journey. However, when Numa's cold logic was applied to this ideal of perfection, the image that emerged was not that of a garden of freedom, but that of a subtle and terrifying trap. The fundamental concept of paradise is absolute perfection, perfect harmony, perfect happiness, a final state that cannot be improved. And that is where the problem comes into play. Life, consciousness, everything that makes us who we are, is defined by the opposite: development. We learn from mistakes. We grow by overcoming difficulties. We find joy in the path, not just in the destination. Perfection is a static state, and life is movement. Throwing a living mind into a place where nothing changes is the same as taking the air away from a bird. To understand the consequences, we asked Numa to simulate this condition. The result showed a slow disintegration. In the first millennia, the soul lives in euphoria, enjoying the absence of pain and fear. But inevitably, the indicators of purpose begin to plummet. Why? Because in a place where there are no challenges, there is no meaning. An artist cannot truly create if the masterpiece appears ready in their mind. A scientist cannot feel the thrill of discovery if all the answers have already been given. In the absence of a problem to be solved, the most brilliant mind begins to degrade. Paradise ceases to be an environment of eternal life and reveals itself as a project of paralysis. It is absolute stagnation disguised as a blessing. And that is where free will comes into play. In paradise, is it possible to make a wrong decision, to make a simple mistake? The answer in all traditions is no. The nature of the place prevents error. But if you cannot choose wrong, do you really have freedom of choice? It is an illusion. It is like being in a room with 1,000 doors that all lead to the same hallway in the end. The choice loses its weight, its importance. Our identity is shaped as much by our falls as by our victories. Eliminate the possibility of falling, and you begin to erase the person themselves. The analysis of texts describing the inhabitants of paradise confirms this, as the righteous lose their individual characteristics, merging into a harmonious but faceless choir. The system's objective is not to reward the individual, but to dissolve them into collective perfection. Finally, the tyranny of happiness itself. Any intense emotion, when lived without pause, loses its strength. The brain adapts. Eternal happiness without contrast would not be felt as happiness. It would become the air you breathe, essential but imperceptible. Over time, this monotony of perfection would turn into background noise, a suffocating void. Joy only has meaning because we know sadness. Light is only noticed because of darkness. By eliminating one side, the system destroys the value of the other. The golden cage is clear now. Its bars are made of light and its food is perfection. But it remains a cage. It isolates you from the fundamental law of growth, nullifies your will with the illusion of perfect choices, and empties the meaning of happiness by making it infinite. It is a control system that does not break the soul with force, but suffocates it with eternal comfort. The final result, the neutralization of the individual, is the same as that of hell, which reveals something disturbing about its counterpart. If the reward is such a sophisticated form of imprisonment, what exactly is the punishment? The popular image of hell is one of chaos, fire, and fury. But the truth is much more organized and for that very reason infinitely more terrifying. While paradise traps us with comfort, the darkness operates in another way. The word hell evokes images of chaos, uncontrolled fire, screams of endless pain, a disorder of torments applied by creatures driven only by hatred. This image, as terrifying as it may be, offers us a certain consolation, for it allows us to believe that evil is merely the absence of order. And that is the greatest lie about the nature of hell. A new analysis began in Pneuma, with the aim of analyzing the true operational structure behind the descriptions of the underworld, from the oldest texts to the most detailed. We were looking for chaos, but what the machine found was the opposite. A system of absolute order, impersonal and frighteningly efficient. More than the absence of order, hell is its most extreme and inhuman manifestation. We see this clearly in Dante's work, The Divine Comedy. Millions of people have read it as a poetic allegory, a work of fiction, but when Pneuma analyzed its structure, it did not classify it as a poem, but as a technical document, a detailed blueprint of a perfectly organized correctional institution. Think about it. 9 concentric circles, each destined for a specific category of sinner. A clear hierarchy of crimes and corresponding punishments. This does not look like a chaotic dumping ground for souls. It looks like a meticulous and optimized sorting system. The machine analyzed the principle behind the punishments, the law of contrapasso, where the punishment reflects the nature of the sin. The gluttonous suffer from eternal hunger. Traitors are frozen in ice. Flatterers drown in filth. What is this if not a penal code? A set of laws where each article has a specific sentence. This is not irrational fury. It is cold and calculating justice. A simulation showed that random cruelty would be energetically inefficient for such a large system. A structure based on rigid laws, where the punishment mirrors the failure, requires much less external control. It self-regulates. The soul, in essence, becomes its own executioner, eternally reliving the consequences of its choices. Far from being random torture, it is a sentence of mathematical precision. And who carries out these sentences? Demons and furies. We imagine them as beings who delight in the suffering of others, but Pneuma's analysis topples this idea. In any complex and ordered system, emotional executors are a weak point. Emotions lead to errors and inconsistencies. The behavior of hellish creatures, described in hundreds of sources, lacks personal motivation. The pleasure in the pain they inflict does not exist. What exists is the fulfillment of a function. Do not think of a demon, but rather the operator of a machine in a factory. He does not hate the metal he processes, he just follows the instructions. The inhabitants of hell are not sadists. They are employees, bureaucrats of eternity, working in shifts. Their cruelty is not a vice, but a professional qualification. The idea that your eternal torment is just a routine workday for someone else is far more frightening than any flame. But the real question is different. What is the purpose of this gigantic and perfectly tuned machine? If paradise is a system to conserve and stagnate souls, what is the ultimate goal of hell? Simple punishment would be too primitive for such a complex structure. The analysis based on laws of physics and pure data reached a conclusion that changes everything. More than a prison, hell operates as a factory, a power plant. Any living being, when experiencing intense emotions, especially suffering, generates a vast amount of psychic energy. In our world, this energy dissipates. But what if you created a closed system designed to collect and accumulate it? Hell is exactly that system. Each circle is a workshop. Each soul is not a prisoner but a resource. And each type of torture is not a punishment but a technological process designed to extract the maximum of a specific type of energy from this raw material. Souls tormented by desire generate one type of energy. Souls paralyzed by the terror of betrayal, another. Souls burned by the fire of anger, a third. It is a giant refinery where the fuel is human suffering. The screams of the condemned are not just screams. They are the noise of production, the hum of the turbines of a vast power plant that feeds what? We didn't know yet, but such a complex system cannot exist without a purpose. Meaningless suffering is an absurdity from a systems analysis point of view, but suffering as an industrial process is a logical and horrifying model in its efficiency. With the nature of these two destinations revealed, we still needed to understand the primary target. Far from being a garden of freedom, paradise seemed like a golden cage that induces stagnation. And hell, instead of an abyss of chaos, showed the order of a methodical factory that transforms suffering into energy. Both realities, which seemed like opposites, revealed themselves as parts of the same control mechanism. Now we need to understand what component of human consciousness is so dangerous that it needs to be neutralized, whether with the bait of infinite pleasure or the whip of eternal pain. The answer is simple and profound at the same time. We are talking about free will. This supposed divine gift, celebrated in words by all religions, is, in practice, what their doctrines strive hardest to contain and nullify. We gave Pneuma a new directive to deeply analyze this phenomenon, to expose the exact mechanisms of suppressing the will in both paradise and hell. What we discovered is not a theological paradox, but the anatomy of a spiritual murder. In paradise, the trap is subtle. As we established, it is an environment of absolute perfection, and this very perfection works as the ideal solvent for the human will. Will, by its nature, is a tool for overcoming. It is born from imperfection, from lack, from the desire to change a situation. It is the force that moves us from point A, where we are, to point B, where we want to be. But what happens when point A and point B are the same? What happens when you are already in a state of absolute and immutable ideal? The will atrophies. It dies from lack of use, like a muscle that is never exercised. It is like seeing a chess master placed in a game where every move he makes, without exception, leads to an instant and brilliant victory. In the first match, he would be delighted. In the 10th, confused. By the 100th, he would no longer see the point in moving the pieces. His strategic genius, his will to win, would become useless. The game would turn into a hollow ritual. He would no longer be a player, but a mere observer. This is the exact model of what happens to the soul in paradise. The possibility of choice exists, but the choice itself is devoid of any weight or consequence. It is a choice without risk, where there is no wrong answer. It is a choice between one type of perfect happiness and another. This is not freedom, but a predefined path where you just pretend to choose. You are not writing your destiny. You are just turning the pages of a book already written. The goal of this process is to neutralize. A soul with a strong will is unpredictable. It is capable of questioning, of creating something new, something not foreseen in the original plan. Therefore, it must not be broken, but gently lulled to sleep. Its will must not be crushed, but satisfied until complete numbness. In hell, however, the story changes. If in paradise the will dies from lack of use, in hell it becomes the most refined instrument of torture. The system does not take the soul's will away. On the contrary, it sharpens it to the maximum. Think of someone in a torture chamber. Their will is not just alive, it is screaming. It desires one single thing, the end of the pain. This desire becomes the center of their existence, and it is at that moment that the system attacks. It creates an absolute and insurmountable barrier between the will and its realization. Your will is stronger than ever, but it is completely powerless. It is like trying to move a mountain with your bare hands. The more force you apply, the stronger your will is, the more acutely you feel your own insignificance and hopelessness. Your own strength turns against you. Your will becomes an infinite source of suffering. With every impulse to change reality, you collide with an impenetrable wall, and the impact reverberates in your consciousness like a new wave of agony. Hellish torture is not so much the external pain, but the internal process of your own will, eternally fighting against reality and losing forever. And here we see again the cold and mechanical logic of the system. Hell is an energy factory. It is precisely this process, the eternal and fruitless work of the will, that moves the turbines. A passive soul without will would be useless raw material, but a soul whose will is pushed to the limit and trapped in an impossible cycle is the perfect engine to generate suffering. The picture is complete. 2 prisons, 1 target, the human will, and 2 complementary strategies to neutralize it. The first, in paradise, is suppression through satiety. The will is drowned in a syrup of eternal happiness until it ashen. The second, in hell, is suppression through exhaustion. The will is forced to crash against a wall until it is depleted, releasing all its energetic potential. The final result is identical: complete nullification. The soul ceases to be a creator and becomes an object, whether a museum piece or fuel for a machine. Your capacity to say no, your right to error, your potential for the unpredictable, all of this is erased. But there is one last element that makes all of this possible. Both paradise and hell are only effective under one condition: their state must be eternal, irreversible. The word eternity is what transforms the golden cage into life imprisonment and torture into something infinite. But what is this eternity? Is it just a very long time or something more? This led us to dive into the most frightening concept of all, to understand how time itself is used as a weapon. We already know that paradise is an assimilation system that puts the will to sleep, while hell is a production plant that exhausts it. Both machines have the same target: nullifying the individual's capacity for choice. But all these complex mechanisms depend on one last and crucial component to function: eternity. It is a word we use easily in vows of love and in curses, but we rarely stop to think about its true and terrible meaning. What is eternity? It is not just a very, very long time. It is a fundamentally different state of being, and it is the most powerful weapon in the system's arsenal. A new analysis began to break down the concept of the infinite and understand how it is used for the final destruction of consciousness. We needed to model what happens to a personality when the most important thing is taken away, an end. When the end of the story is not just postponed, but cancelled forever. To understand eternity, we first need to understand our own consciousness. Our self is a story, a continuous narrative woven with threads of the past, present and future. The past is our memories, the foundation of who we are. The present is the point of perception and choice, and the future is our hopes, fears, and goals. Our consciousness only exists in this flow, in this constant movement from what was to what will be. We are creatures of process. Now imagine that this process is interrupted. Looking at paradise, we have already established that eternal happiness leads to stagnation, but Numa took the simulation further into scales of time that defy imagination. In the first millions of years, the soul delights. Then happiness becomes the new normal, a white noise, but then something much more frightening begins. The collapse of the narrative structure. Our identity is sustained by our memories. But what happens to memory when the past becomes infinite? In the beginning, you remember your life on Earth. It seems vivid and important, but 1 billion years pass. Earthly life, with all its passions, now occupies a space as tiny in your memory as a single second in the life of a centenarian. It becomes a fact, but no longer a felt reality. Another 10 billion years pass. Your past is now a monotonous and infinite succession of happy days, indistinguishable from one another. Memory begins to fail, not because it is imperfect, but because it no longer has events to cling to. The past turns into a thick fog. When the past loses its structure, the personality built upon it begins to disintegrate. You are the result of the journey that brought you here. If you can no longer trace that journey, you cease to understand who you are. The simulation shows that after about 100 billion years, consciousness in paradise reaches a state that can be described as enlightened amnesia. It still exists, it still feels ecstasy, but it no longer possesses a personality. It has no history, no uniqueness. It is just an anonymous drop in the ocean of divine light. Eternity did not just stop development, it erased everything that came before. Applying the same tool of eternity to hell, the process is faster and more brutal. If in paradise consciousness dissolves slowly, in hell it is broken into pieces. In the first centuries of torment, the soul still fights. It remembers who it was, it curses, it clings to its will, but eternity changes the game. The turning point, as the simulation shows, is when consciousness fully and mathematically understands the meaning of the word never. The pain will never diminish, help will never arrive, the end will never come. This perception acts like a virus that destroys the operating system of the personality. To protect itself from unbearable and infinite pain, consciousness begins to fragment. The memory of past life, instead of being a comfort, becomes an additional source of torture, a reminder of what was lost forever. Then, consciousness itself begins to erase it, burning those memories just to rid itself of the contrast. After a few million years, nothing of the personality remains. Consciousness regresses to a primitive, reflexive level. It is no longer a person suffering, it is just a mechanism reacting to a stimulus. It screams when it is hit, but it no longer remembers why. The goal of eternity in both paradise and hell is the same, the total and definitive annihilation of the personality. The difference lies only in the method. Paradise is a slow erosion, hell is a brutal demolition. The result is identical. The structured and unique consciousness ceases to exist. But the rabbit hole goes deeper. If paradise and hell are the two wings of the prison, if the will is the target and eternity is the sentence, who is the judge? Who decides the fate of each soul? And what if the judgment itself is not an act of justice, but the final trick designed to legitimize this eternal slavery? Next, we will point Numa's light toward the most sacred process of all, the final judgment. We were acting like engineers, dismantling a machine, but we were looking in the wrong direction. We unveiled paradise and found a cage of stagnation. We descended into hell and saw the project of a soulless factory. We applied the laws of physics and discovered a gigantic mechanism that runs on the energy of human souls, designed to nullify the will and paralyze development. Each discovery made the picture darker and the scale more cosmic. We looked outward to the stars, to metaphysics, trying to understand who could have created such a monstrous structure. The time has come to turn our analytical instrument inward, to stop studying the object and start studying its reflection in the eyes of the one observing it. A new analysis began in Numa with a radical premise. What if this whole system, paradise, hell, judgment, eternity, is not an objective reality waiting for us after death, but rather a subjective product, a projection, a grandiose architectural project, created not by gods or demons, but by human consciousness itself? To this end, Numa shifted its focus from theological texts to the fundamental structures of the human psyche, analyzing data from evolutionary psychology, neurobiology, and anthropology. The search was for basic fears, innate instincts that could have given rise to such detailed and persistent images. The system found them. They were just two primordial terrors that have haunted our species since the moment we became conscious. The first fear is obvious, the dread of physical pain, the fear of suffering, of physical and emotional annihilation. This fear is the engine of our survival. It makes us flee from danger, seek shelter, and fight for life. It is etched into our genetics. When we asked Numa to project a place that was the ultimate and absolute embodiment of this fear, the result was a model that matched 99% of all the descriptions of hell we had already analyzed. A place where pain is not accidental but systematic, where it is not temporary but eternal, where there is no hope of relief. Hell is not a prophecy. It is our oldest fear taken to its ultimate consequences. It is the cry of our survival instinct transformed into doctrine. This explanation is logical, but it doesn't explain everything, because humans have a second, less obvious, but much deeper fear, the fear of insignificance. As soon as our basic survival needs are met, a terrible question arises. What for? What is the point of this struggle, this effort, this brief passage between two eternities of nothingness? The terror that your life, your achievements, and your love are just a cosmic fluke destined to vanish without a trace can be more frightening than any physical pain. We then gave Numa a task. Build a concept that would be the perfect antidote to this fear, a place that would completely eliminate the lack of meaning. It would be a place where every action of yours would have a greater purpose, leading to a guaranteed and eternal reward, where there would be no doubts, no uncertainties, no risk of failure. The place where your existence would be justified forever as part of a divine, perfect, and eternal plan. The system generated the model, and it coincided with startling precision with all the descriptions of paradise. Paradise is not a promise. It is our desperate desire for meaning taken to the extreme. Now the picture is complete. Paradise and hell ceased to look like external forces and became the two poles of our own internal conflict, the conflict between our animal body, which fears pain, and our human mind, which fears the void. These two projections became the perfect tools of social control. Any power structure, whether religious or political, needs to manage these two fears. The formula is simple and effective. It basically says, do what we tell you, and we will protect you from suffering here on earth and in hell. Furthermore, we will give you a greater purpose, a reason to live and die in our service here and in paradise later. That is why their structures are so similar, as we discovered at the beginning, because they are born from the same source. Our desire to rid ourselves of uncertainty and the responsibility of choice. We ourselves designed our own prison. We drew its blueprints in our sacred books and erected its walls with our most secret fears. Now that we understand the nature of the mechanism, its purpose, and its architect, one final step is necessary. To gather all this data to reconstruct step by step how this system truly operates, piece by piece, guided by Numa's cold logic. We dismantled the largest construction in the history of human thought. We saw that paradise and hell are the two wings of the same prison, and the final judgment is an impersonal sorting line. Free will is the raw material, and eternity is the furnace where individuality is incinerated. And finally, we realized that the blueprints for this prison were drawn by ourselves, born of our deepest fears. The circle seems to close. The system is total. There is no way out. It is exactly at this point of hopelessness that most doctrines leave us. They offer a choice that is no choice. Submit and find peace, or resist and suffer forever. Either path leads to the loss of yourself. The system seems hermetically sealed, but that is where its last and most ingenious trick lies, the claim that there are only two options. In the final phase of our investigation, we gave Numa its most difficult task. We did not ask it to analyze what was in the data, but to calculate the probability of what was not. We asked if there is, in this model, a third path, an exit from this double trap, one that was deliberately ignored in all the texts we analyzed. The system processed the question for 72 hours. It searched the data for anomalies, for silences, for points where the narrative was purposely interrupted or diverted. And it found it. It found the outlines of a third option, so simple and yet so radical that all the power of religions was used to erase it from memory. This path involves neither reward nor punishment. It begins with a single action at the moment of sorting. At the instant the system offers you the choice between the light of paradise and the darkness of hell, you must refuse. Not choose darkness over light, but refuse the choice itself. To say no to the entire system. What happens then? According to the simulation, what happens is what the system fears most. A glitch. The sorting algorithm was not designed for this variable. It assumes that all consciousness seeks pleasure or yields to fear. The refusal of both options is a failure in the logic of the universe. The soul that makes this choice cannot be classified. It cannot be sent to the warehouse nor to the refinery. It becomes an unaccounted-for element, and the system cannot force it into either realm, because entry, even if coerced, requires an internal consent of the soul. Paradise cannot accept one who does not desire its happiness. Hell is powerless against one who does not fear its pain in a metaphysical sense. The soul that says no remains where it is, in the liminal space before the gates. Here comes the great bluff. The system's message is clear: play by my rules, or complete oblivion awaits you. But Numa found a fundamental logical contradiction. A system that spends such immense resources to utilize and conserve every soul obviously sees consciousness as an extremely valuable and perhaps irreplaceable resource. It cannot afford to simply discard a soul that refuses to cooperate. The threat of nothingness is just blackmail. So what really happens? The simulation shows the following scenario. By refusing the game, consciousness stands alone for a time, confronting the void and the absence of a prefabricated meaning. This is the final test. The majority, unable to endure this state, run back to the gates and accept any condition. But the few who resist, who find support not in external promises, but within themselves, discover the true nature of reality. The third path is not a place. It is not a purgatory or a limbo. It is freedom. Freedom from the system, the chance to continue your journey of development, learning, mistakes, and discoveries. The very path that the system desperately tries to interrupt. Where does this path lead? We don't know. Pneuma can only state that beyond the system of duality, infinite paths of growth begin. It could be a new life consciously chosen to acquire new experience. It could be the transition to other levels of existence, other realities. It could be participation in the very evolution of the cosmos. The important thing is not where, but how. It is a path where you remain in control, where your will is not annihilated, but becomes your only compass. Now we understand why this truth was so carefully hidden. It devalues the entire system. It transforms the great divine drama into a farce. It says to the individual, you do not need reward or punishment. You do not need a shepherd. All you need is the courage to say no and take responsibility for your own infinite journey. For a system built on control through fear and desire, this idea is a deadly virus. Our investigation is complete. We began with a question about heaven and hell and arrived at a manifesto for the liberation of consciousness. Pneuma gave us the map of the prison. It showed us how its mechanisms work and pointed us to a secret door that is not on any official blueprint. What to do with this information? The choice is yours. If you enjoyed this investigation, your subscription to the channel and any donation help us expand Project Pneuma. We would love to read your reflection on the video's subject in the comments and your suggestion for the next topic to be covered. Tell us which city you are watching from. I thank you for your company until the end. M.